now we kind of have our bare bones set up here. So let's actually start writing some React, because so far this is not a very good intro to React. So here, inside of my complete intro to React, I'm going to create a new file, and it's going to be called index.html. Okay. I'm going to put the bare bones for an HTML document. HTML:5. So I'm using something called Emmet, which kind of outside the scope of this class, but it's super useful. It used to be called Zen Coding. It's just like a bunch of shortcuts for writing HTML really fast, which is how I scaffolded that out. Okay, we're going to create a file, and I'm going to call it svideo. That's what I named my little app here. You can call your video app whatever you want to call it. Okay, here we're going to put a div, and its ID is going to be called app. And then we're going to do two things right here. We're going to put two script tags. One of them is going to be equal to node modules /react/dist/react.js. So we're going to be pulling in the pre-bundled React file so that we can play with it without doing any sort of bundling. Okay, and then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to do another script tag, node modules /react-dom/dist/react-dom.js. Okay? So here's a big key about React here. I imagine a lot of you have heard of things like React Native and React VR, A-Frame React. There's a bunch of them, right? So you can think of React being kind of split into two parts, meaning if you're going to use React, you're always going to have to require two different libraries. There is the top-level React part, which is the same across React Native, React DOM, React everything. This is the library where we actually create components, and it has like the lifecycle methods. It has all of these different things that you as a developer interact with. And then between React and whatever you're rendering to, there sits a glue layer, right? That translates React components to DOM nodes or to, native UI elements, right? So that's what React Native is. That's what React DOM is, right? It's these different glue layers, the rendering layers, right? So we're going to actually be coding with React, but at the very end, we'll pull in React DOM to actually render out to the DOM, right? So that's why they're two separate libraries. It used to be the same thing up until like React 0.12, maybe? No, don't quote me on that. Okay, so underneath that, we're going to do a script tag. So when we pull these in, React and React DOM, it's going to make them available as a global variable that we can refer to. So now we have React and React DOM. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say const my first component, and it's going to just be a function. And we're going to say return react.createElement div, null. Okay. And then I'm going to do some kind of funky spacing here, but it'll make sense in a moment why I did that. Then here I'm going to say react.createElement h1 null, and this is my first component, or whatever you want to render out. Okay. Then down here at the bottom, I'm going to say React DOM.render And we're going to say react.createElement, my first component, and then we're going to tell it where to render. So in this case, we want it to render up here in the app ID. So we're going to say document get element by ID app. Okay. So I'll explain it momentarily, but let's go and make sure that I'm not full of shit and it actually works. There's always a distinct possibility that I'm making things up. So I'm just going to literally just open the file with my browser. Eventually we'll get to serving with a server, whatever, but this will work for now. Let's see, so I need to go to talks. Nope, FEM, there we go, index.html. And you can see here it says this is my first component, right? This is React at its most base level. And that's all you're going to learn in this workshop. So wrap it up, we're done. Just kidding. Well, I mean, sort of. No, I'm kidding. OK, so let's talk about what's going on here. So here we're creating a React component, right? This is my first component, right? Which you can think of as like a blueprint for creating new components. Or for those of you that like the Java-y, classy object-orientedness, this is a class, right? And we can create many instances of this class. So we have created a reusable component here that every time that we render it out, so if I inspect this element right here, you can see here there's a div and an h1, right? So every time that I create a new like stamp, a new instance of this my first component, right, it's going to render out this particular bit of markup. Now this isn't really super interesting right now, right? Like it's really just a div and a h1. It would have been way easier to just me going in here and say, okay, I'm going to put a div right here, right? But where's the fun in that? I wanted to over-engineer it. No, hopefully this is indicative to you that at its most base layer, there's not really a lot to React. The hello world of React is what? This is going to be 10 lines of code. So let's go in and talk about react.createElement then. Okay? So this function right here is a class, right? It's the myFirstComponent class. CreateElement is creating a particular element of something, right? So I'm creating one div instance, right? I'm not creating a new type of div. This is just rendering out a div, right? Same thing here with this h1. Then here, I call createElement, same thing right here. I'm creating an instance of my first component, right? So I could create another component which renders out yet more my first components, right? So they can be, components can be composed of other components as well. Any questions about this example so far? Not super useful yet, but we're getting to the useful part, promise. Okay, so let's actually go create another type of component. So I'm going to create another one called myTitle. So const myTitle, it's going to be another function. And what this is going to do is it's going to return more markup. So we're going to say react.createElement of a div null and we're going to say react.createElement of a h1, h2. So something that you might be noting here, if I pass it a string, it's actually going to render out that sort of tag, right? It's not even really going to keep track of what it is, right? I could put, x my component, and it would render out an x my component tag, right? So this also works with web components if you want to go down that path. If I pass it like a variable name like this, right, my first component, it's not a string, it's a my first component. It's actually going to render out that, it's going to assume that that's a React component and try and render it out that way. and this is going to be my second component. Okay, and then we're going to modify this down here. What's cool about this is create element. So I'm going to put a my title in here, right? But I can actually put multiple my titles in here. So for those of you that like the computer sciencey terms, that create element has variable arity, right? So you can give it as many parameters as you want. That's all that stupid term means. Yeah, so we're going to be creating multiple instances of my title. The other thing that you can do with this is you can give it an array. You can give it an array of React elements, right? Right now, this isn't super important. They kind of look the same, but this will become important later in the course. So just keep in mind that you can also pass it arrays of components. So let's go try and make sure that that works. You can see here I got a bunch of instances of my second component.